Listen close now, children of the forgotten ones. Gather round this fire that remembers what the history books tried to bury. I's an old soul, bent like the roots of them ancient live oaks that witnessed more tears than the Mississippi ever carried to the sea. My voice cracks like the whip that split our people's backs wide open. My bones ache with the weight of them iron shackles that still clang in my dreams. Tonight, I's gonna tell y'all about a woman born under a cursed sky, in a land where cotton was king and black flesh was currency. Her name was Martha, but folks in them quarters whispered another name, Martha du Tronco, Martha of the Trunk, 'cause she was nailed to that devil's stump for 50 long nights. And when she rose up, Lord have mercy, she rose with a blade that sang freedom's song in blood. This here's her story, pulled from the deep well of suffering, from the belly of the beast they called slavery in these United States. The trunk stood in that plantation yard like a throne of torment, waiting for souls to break. But Martha, sweet Jesus, Martha didn't break. She shattered the chains instead. Now hush your hearts and open your ears, 'cause what I's about to tell you ain't in no white man's book. It's written in scars, sung in spirituals, and carried in the blood of them that survived. This is memory made flesh, pain made purpose. Now listen here, child, 'cause this story starts where all suffering begins, in the womb of a woman who knew nothing but bondage. The year was 1815, deep in the heart of Virginia's plantation country, where the soil ran red with clay and blacker still with the blood of our people. Master Harrington's land stretched far as the eye could see, them cotton fields rolling like a white sea under a sky too blue for the hell below. In the center of that plantation yard stood the trunk. Lord have mercy. That cursed oak stump, thick as 3 men standing side by side, its surface scarred and stained dark from years of punishment. Folks swear on their lives they seen spirits hovering round that trunk come midnight, the ghosts of them that suffered there, still crying out. Martha came screaming into this world on a September night when the moon hung low and blood red. Her mama, Abena, was a woman of Senegal stock, strong-backed woman with hands that could weave baskets so tight they held water and secrets both. Abena had crossed that devil's ocean they call the Middle Passage, survived the belly of the slave ship where bodies pressed together like cargo, where the stench of death and despair was so thick it choked the very air. In them days of deep sorrow, Abena learned to sing low, songs in her native tongue that the white folks couldn't steal, melodies that carried the wisdom of the ancestors across the water. The slave quarters where Martha was born wasn't nothing but a row of wooden shacks with gaps in the walls wide enough for winter wind to cut through like a knife. Dirt floors, no windows to speak of, just openings covered with old burlap when the rain came hard. 20 souls crammed into spaces meant for livestock, sleeping on corn shuck mattresses that rustled all night long. The smell of sweat, wood smoke, and suffering hung heavy in the air. But in that darkness, child, in that deep hole of bondage, Abena rocked her newborn and whispered promises the masters would never hear. "You gon' be fierce," she murmured in Martha's tiny ear, her voice carrying the weight of ancient prophecy. "You gon' suffer, but you gon' rise." The old ones told me in a dream, "You marked for something the white man can't understand." Martha's daddy was a man named Kofi, field hand with arms like iron from years of swinging the hoe under that burning sun. He had kind eyes, folks said, eyes that still remembered freedom even after 10 years in chains. But Master Harrington had other plans for Kofi. When Martha was just 5 summers old, barely tall enough to carry water to the fields, a slave trader came riding up in his wagon, man nobody dared look at, with his leather book full of names and his pockets full of coin. The auction block was set up right there in the yard, close enough to the trunk that you could see both monuments to cruelty at once. Martha remembered that day like it was burned into her soul. She was clinging to her mama's skirt, feeling Abena's whole body shake with silent tears as Kofi was let out in chains. The other field hands stood with heads bowed, not daring to look up. But Martha, Lord, that child, she stared right at her daddy. Kofi looked back at her with them eyes full of love and pain, and he mouthed words she couldn't hear but understood in her bones. "Be strong, daughter." $200, the trader called out, And just like that, Kofi was gone. Loaded into a wagon headed for the cotton fields of Mississippi, where they worked men to death in 3 years flat. Martha never saw her daddy again, but his memory lived in her like a coal burning slow and steady. The overseer on Harrington's plantation was a devil named Grimes, cruel-hearted man with a face red from whiskey and meanness. He walked them fields with a whip coiled at his belt like a snake ready to strike, and his eyes, mercy me, his eyes were cold as a February grave. Grimes had a particular way about him, watching the women and girls with a look that made skin crawl. Even when Martha was just a child, barely 10 years old, she felt his gaze following her like a shadow. One evening, as the sun was setting blood red over the cotton fields, and the field hands were trudging back to the quarters, backs bent from 12 hours of picking, Grimes stopped Martha on the path. The other slaves kept moving, eyes down, knowing better than to interfere with white man's business. "You growing up real pretty," Grimes said, his voice slick as oil. "Got your mama's looks? That's gon' serve you well. Or real bad, depending on how you play it." Martha didn't speak. Old wise ones had taught her to keep silent around white folks, especially overseers. But inside, something stirred. A rage that would grow over the years like a tree putting down deep roots. "You hear me, girl?" Grimes stepped closer and Martha could smell the whiskey on his breath. "One day you gon' learn that being nice to me makes life easier. Being difficult," he gestured toward the trunk with his chin, "well, that stump's been waiting for somebody pretty to decorate it." Martha ran then, her bare feet kicking up dust as she fled to the quarters where Abina waited. That night, her mama held her close and sang an old song in Wolof, a language of her ancestors, words that spoke of warriors who never bowed and spirits that never died. But the seeds were planted that day, child. The seeds of suffering and resistance both. Martha grew up fast in them quarters, learning the ways of survival that all enslaved children learned. She worked in the fields by age 7, her small hands learning to pick cotton without tearing the bolls, her back learning to bend under the skin and heat of the Virginia sun. She learned to read the white folks' moods, to know when to speak and when silence was the only shield. She learned the spirituals, them coded songs that carried messages of hope and escape, songs like "Wade in the Water" that told freedom seekers how to cover their tracks from the hounds. The old ones in the quarters taught her other things too. A woman named Aunt Zilpha, ancient as the hills with skin like polished walnut and eyes that saw too much, showed Martha the ways of root work. "This here's High John root," Zilpha whispered, showing her a gnarled piece that looked like a tiny man. "Carry this in a mojo bag, and it give you courage when fear tries to break you down." Zilpha taught her about gopher dust, that powerful mixture of graveyard dirt, sulfur, and salt that could curse or protect depending on the intent. She showed her how to make a hand, a little flannel bag filled with roots and herbs and personal items, tied up and carried close to the heart. "The ancestors watching, child," Zilpha said. "They crossed that water in chains, but their spirits flew back home. They watching over us still." By the time Martha turned 15, she had grown into a striking young woman, tall and strong-backed like her mama, with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that burned with an inner fire. She wasn't no house slave, pampered and light-skinned, favored by the mistress for pouring tea. No, Martha was a field hand through and through, her hands calloused from the hoe, her back striped from the occasional whipping when the overseer felt cruel. But she had learned to protect herself with silence and cunning. She kept her eyes down but her ears open. She learned which drivers were sympathetic to their own people and which had sold their souls for a few extra rations. She learned the layout of the plantation, where the big house stood with its white columns proud as soldiers, where the smokehouse held the meat that slaves were forbidden to touch, where the praise house stood for Sunday services under the watchful eyes of white preachers who preached obedience. And she learned about the trunk. That cursed stump stood in the center of the yard like a warning, like a promise of pain. It was there Martha saw a man named Solomon tied for 3 days and nights, his wrists bound with hemp rope to iron rings driven into the wood, his body exposed to sun, rain, and biting insects. His crime: talking back to Grimes. By the third day, Solomon was barely conscious, skin blistered and raw. He never was quite right after that, folks said. Something broke inside him that never mended. Martha watched and remembered. She added it to the growing ledger of injustices her heart kept, each one a mark against the day of reckoning she felt coming like a storm on the horizon. One night, when Martha was lying on her corn-shuck mattress in the quarters, the other slaves breathing heavy in sleep around her, she had a vision. It came sudden and powerful, like a hand reaching through the veil between worlds. She saw herself nailed to the trunk, not tied but nailed, iron spikes driven through her palms into the wood, blood running down her arms, black as tar in the moonlight. And then she heard a voice, deep and ancient, speaking in a language she didn't know but understood in her soul. "You will bleed on the trunk, daughter, but the trunk will bleed too. Your pain will birth freedom. Your suffering will become the sword." Martha woke, gasping, her mama's hand on her shoulder. "What you dream, child?" Abina asked, her voice tight with worry. "The trunk, mama," Martha whispered. "I'm gonna suffer there, but I'm gonna rise too. The ancestors promised." Abina pulled her daughter close, and in the dark of that slave cabin she began to pray, mixing Christian words with African invocations, calling on Jesus and the Orishas both, asking for protection and strength for her daughter in the trials ahead. Outside, the Virginia night was heavy with humidity and the chirping of crickets. And if you listened close, you could almost hear the trunk itself groaning, like it knew what was coming, like it was hungry for the story about to unfold. In them days of deep sorrow, everything was a sign. Everything was prophecy. And Martha, at 15 years old, already carried the weight of her destiny on her shoulders like invisible chains. But she didn't know yet about Josiah. She didn't know about the joy that would come before the suffering, the brief light before the darkness. She didn't know that love could bloom even in the barren soil of bondage, or that hope could take root in the most unlikely places. That part of the story was still unwritten, still waiting in the wings like an actor ready to step onto the stage of her life. But Grimes was already watching, already planning, already waiting for his moment to strike. And the trunk? That devil Stump stood patient and silent, knowing that all roads led back to it eventually, knowing that Martha's blood had already been promised to its scarred surface. The seeds were planted, the stage was set. Now the tragedy could begin. Now you see, people, love don't ask permission to grow, not even in the darkest soil of bondage. It was in Martha's 16th year when Josiah came walking into her life like an answer to a prayer she didn't know she'd been praying. Master Harrington had bought him from a plantation in North Carolina, paid good money for a blacksmith, 'cause a man who could work iron was worth more than 3 field hands put together. Josiah was a powerful, strong man, standing near 6 feet tall with shoulders broad as a barn door, and hands that looked like they could bend steel bars barehanded. His skin was dark as midnight, smooth and unmarked except for one long scar that ran from his left shoulder down to his elbow. A burn from molten iron, he'd say later, from when he was learning the trade as a boy. But what struck Martha most when she first laid eyes on him wasn't his strength or his size. It was his eyes. Lord have mercy. Them eyes were gentle as morning dew. Eyes that still held kindness despite everything he'd seen and suffered. The blacksmith shop on Harrington's plantation was a separate building near the big house, brick-built with a forge that glowed red-hot from dawn to dusk. Josiah worked there mending plows, shoeing horses, making nails and hinges, all the iron work that kept the plantation running smooth. The masters gave blacksmiths a little more freedom than field hands, a little more dignity, 'cause they needed the skill too much to break the man completely. But it was still bondage, still chains, just chains made of dependence instead of iron. Martha first met Josiah proper at the praise house on a Sunday evening. The white preacher had finished his sermon about obedience and submission. Slaves, obey your masters from Ephesians, that verse they loved to beat us over the head with, and had gone back to his comfortable bed. But the slaves stayed, like they always did, and when the white folks were gone, the real worship began. Old Brother Samuel started humming low, and then the others joined in, creating a sound that seemed to rise up from the earth itself. It was a ring shout, that sacred circle dance that our people brought from Africa and kept alive despite everything. Bodies swaying, feet shuffling in a counterclockwise motion, hands clapping a rhythm older than slavery. The song had no words at first, just moans and hums that carried the weight of all our unspeakable sorrows. Martha was in the circle when she felt someone watching her. She looked up and saw Josiah standing in the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the purple twilight. He wasn't moving, wasn't joining the shout, just watching her with them gentle eyes. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, maybe. Like two souls that had known each other before this life and were just now remembering. After the worship ended and folks were walking back to their quarters under a sky full of stars, Josiah caught up with Martha on the muddy road. "Sister," he said, his voice deep and smooth as river stones. "I don't mean to be forward, but I seen you in there and I felt something I ain't felt in a long time." Martha kept walking, but slower now, letting him match her pace. "What you felt, brother?" "Hope," he said simply, like maybe there's still something beautiful in this world worth living for. In them days of deep sorrow, words like that could make a soul weep. Martha stopped walking and looked at him full in the face. "You new here," she said. "You don't know yet what kind of place this is, what kind of man Master Harrington is, what kind of devil Overseer Grimes is." "I know enough," Josiah replied. "I've been enslaved all my life, born in chains same as you. But I also know this, the masters can own our bodies, but they can't own what's inside unless we let them. My mama taught me that before she was sold away when I was 8 years old." Something in Martha's chest loosened when he said that. She nodded slowly. "Your mama was wise." "Walk with me a little?" Josiah asked, gesturing toward the path that led past the cotton gin and down toward the creek. "Just to talk. Nothing improper." And so they walked, two souls stolen from Africa and born into American bondage, finding a moment of peace in the gathering darkness. They talked about small things at first, the weather, the work, the songs they remembered from childhood. But as the weeks passed and they found more moments together, stolen minutes between labor and exhaustion, they talked about deeper things, dreams that seemed impossible, freedom that felt like a word from another language, children they might have one day, if God was merciful enough to let them keep a family together. The old ones in the quarters noticed the courtship and approved. Aunt Zilpha, the root doctor, gave Martha a mojo bag filled with Adam and Eve root, 2 pieces that looked like tiny people, male and female, intertwined. "This here's for lasting love," she whispered. "Carry it close to your heart, and that man'll stay true." But courting under slavery was a dangerous thing, child. You couldn't just walk up to the master and ask to marry. Some plantations didn't allow it at all. Some masters would marry couples just so they could breed more slaves, treating human beings like livestock. And some, like Grimes, took pleasure in tearing apart any happiness they saw among the enslaved, just to prove they could. 6 months after Josiah arrived, on a June night when the moon hung full and silver, the slave community held a secret wedding in the Hush Harbor. That was a sacred place, hidden deep in the woods where the Spanish moss hung like ghostly curtains, and the cypress trees grew thick enough to hide gatherings from the paddy rollers. The old ones had been meeting there for years, worshiping God and the ancestors in the way they chose, not the way the white preachers demanded. Brother Samuel officiated, though he had no legal authority. But what's law to people who ain't even considered human under it? He led Martha and Josiah through the ceremony, while 24 witnesses stood in a circle, holding pine knot torches that cast dancing shadows on the trees. "You come here of your own will?" Brother Samuel asked. "We do," they answered together. Then in the sight of God and these witnesses, in the presence of the ancestors who crossed the water, and the spirits who watch over us still, I pronounce you joined together. What the masters say don't matter here. Before heaven and earth you are one. They jumped the broom. that old tradition carried from Africa, where crossing over a broom laid on the ground symbolized crossing into a new life together. As Martha leaped over it with Josiah's hand in hers, the community erupted in quiet celebration. They couldn't be too loud, couldn't risk drawing attention, but they hummed and swayed, passing around cornbread and a little bit of stolen molasses, making what joy they could from scraps. Josiah had hammered out 2 simple iron rings in his forge, risking punishment if anyone noticed the missing metal. He slipped one onto Martha's finger, and she slipped the other onto his. They weren't gold, weren't fancy, just plain iron, dark and strong. But they meant everything. "I can't promise you an easy life," Josiah whispered as they stood together under that full moon. "Can't promise freedom or comfort, but I promise you this. I'll stand beside you in every storm. I'll love you till my last breath leaves this body." "That's all I need," Martha whispered back. And for the first time since her daddy was sold away, she felt something like peace settle into her bones. Master Harrington never officially recognized the marriage, but he didn't prevent it either. He saw it as practical. Married slaves were less likely to run, especially once children came. And children came quickly in that first year. Martha's belly swelled with new life. And despite the brutal work in the fields, despite the constant threat of separation or violence, she felt joy stirring inside her alongside the baby. Ella was born on a cold January morning in 1833, squalling loud enough to wake the whole quarters. She had her mama's fierce eyes and her daddy's strong spirit. Josiah held his daughter for the first time with hands still black from the forge, and he wept like his heart would burst. "She beautiful," he kept saying. "Lord God, she the most beautiful thing I ever seen." 2 years later came Thomas, a boy they called Tom, who was quieter than his sister but just as strong-willed. Now Martha had 2 children to worry about, 2 souls that could be torn from her at any master's whim. The fear never left her, not for a moment. Every time a slave trader's wagon rolled up the drive, her heart stopped. Every time Grimes looked at her children, her blood ran cold. But for a brief time, maybe 3 years, maybe 4, there was sweetness mixed with the bitter. Josiah would come home from the forge at dusk, covered in soot and ash, and swing little Ella up onto his shoulders while Tom grabbed his leg. Martha would make what supper they could from the rations, cornmeal mush, a bit of salt pork if they were lucky. And they'd sit together on the steps of their cabin, watching the sun sink behind the cotton fields. "Tell us the story about Anansi the spider," Ella would beg, and Josiah would weave tales carried from Africa, stories about a trickster who outwitted stronger enemies through cleverness. "See, baby girl," he'd say, "you don't need to be the biggest or the strongest. You just need to be smart and keep your spirit free." Martha taught the children songs, spirituals that sounded like worship but carried coded messages. "Follow the drinking gourd" was about the North Star and the path to freedom. "Wade in the water" told fugitives to travel through streams to hide their scent from the dogs. Even at 4 and 2 years old, Ella and Tom were learning the language of resistance disguised as praise. But sweet Jesus, that happiness was fragile as glass. Grimes was still there, still watching. He'd been waiting, patient as a snake in tall grass, for his moment. And Martha knew, deep in her bones she knew, that the peace couldn't last. The ancestors had warned her in that dream years ago. The trunk was still waiting. It started small, the way evil often does. Grimes began finding reasons to dock Josiah's rations, claiming the blacksmith work wasn't up to standard. He'd ride past Martha in the fields and make comments just loud enough for her to hear. "That husband of yours getting weak. Wonder how long before Master decides to sell him and get a younger smith." Then he started showing up near their cabin at night, making excuses about checking on the quarters. Martha would see him standing in the shadows, watching their family through the cracks in the walls. The violation of it made her skin crawl. One evening, after a particularly long day picking cotton under that skin and heat, Martha was walking back to the quarters with Ella, holding her hand, and baby Tom on her hip. Grimes rode up on his horse, blocking the path. "You looking tired, Martha," he said, his voice dripping false concern. "All that work in the fields, taking care of them babies, must be hard on a woman." "I'm fine, sir," Martha said, keeping her eyes down like she'd been taught. "See, I've been thinking," Grimes continued, leaning down from his saddle. "Things could be easier for you. Better rations. Lighter work. Maybe even a cabin closer to the big house, away from all that noise in the quarters." Martha's jaw clenched. She knew exactly what he was suggesting. The same thing overseers had been suggesting to enslaved women since the first ship crossed the Atlantic. "I'm married, sir," she said quietly. "Got a husband and children. I'm blessed enough." Grimes's face darkened. "You think that matters? You think that paper-thin blacksmith can protect you? Girl, I could have him sold tomorrow. Could have them children sold. You'd be wise to remember who really has power here." Little Ella, only 5 years old but already understanding too much, pressed herself against her mama's leg. Martha's whole body was shaking, but not from fear, from fury held back by nothing but the knowledge that one wrong word could destroy her family. "I need to get these children fed, sir," she said, her voice tight as a drum. Grimes stared at her for a long moment, then smiled, a cold, cruel smile that promised nothing good. "You go on then. But Martha, you think about what I said. Think about it real hard, 'cause one way or another you gon' learn your place." He rode off, leaving Martha standing in the road with her children, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. That night, she told Josiah everything. He sat on their cabin floor, fists clenched so tight his knuckles went pale. "I'ma kill him," Josiah said, his voice low and dangerous. "I swear before God and the ancestors, if he touch you—" "No," Martha said firmly, grabbing his face in her hands. "That's what he want. He wants you to do something foolish so he got an excuse to hang you. We got to be smart. We got to survive." But even as she said the words, Martha felt the web tightening around them, felt the trap closing. The brief season of sweetness was ending. The storm was coming, and in the center of the plantation yard, under the moonlight, the trunk stood waiting, patient, hungry, ready. "Now listen here, child, 'cause this is where the sweetness turned to gall, where the brief light got swallowed by darkness thick as molasses." It was a Tuesday morning in July, hot enough to make the devil himself sweat, when Martha's defiance finally gave Grimes the excuse he'd been hungering for. The field hands were picking cotton under that burning sun, backs bent like question marks, fingers bleeding from the sharp bowls. Martha was working her row steady and fast. She'd learned long ago that speed was the only shield against the overseer's whip. Little Ella was back at the quarters with the other small children, watched over by old Aunt Zilpha, while baby Tom was strapped to Martha's back in a sling made from old flour sacks. Grimes came riding through the fields on his big bay horse, that whip coiled at his saddle like a sleeping serpent. He'd been drinking. You could smell the whiskey rolling off him in waves, and his eyes had that mean glaze that meant trouble was coming for somebody. "You there, Martha?" he called out, reining in his horse beside her row. "Your count's been short 3 days running. You getting lazy on me?" Martha kept her eyes on the cotton, kept her hands moving. "No, sir. I've been picking steady." "Don't you lie to me, gal." Grimes swung down from his horse, stumbling a little as his boots hit the red clay. "You think I don't notice when you nursing that baby every hour? Think I don't see you slowing down?" The other field hands kept working, heads down. But Martha could feel their fear like a physical presence. Everyone knew what happened when Grimes got in this mood. Someone was going to suffer, and today that someone had Martha's name written all over it. "Baby's gotta eat, sir," Martha said, her voice steady but her heart pounding like African drums in her chest. "I'm working fast as I can." "Fast as you can?" Grimes laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Let me tell you something about fast. That pretty mouth of yours been running fast enough when you spit in my face that night at the barn. You remember that, Martha? You remember showing me disrespect? Sweet Jesus, he'd been holding on to that grudge like poison in a jar, waiting for the right moment to pour it out. "I apologize for that, sir," Martha said, though the words tasted like ashes. "I was wrong." "Damn right you were wrong." Grimes grabbed her arm, yanking her upright so hard that baby Tom woke up and started crying. And now you gon' learn what happens to uppity negresses who forget their place. You gon' learn real good." He dragged Martha toward the edge of the field where a old oak tree stood, its branches spreading wide like the arms of an indifferent god. The other slaves had stopped working now, watching with horrified eyes as their worst fears unfolded. Even the drivers, black men forced to oversee their own people, looked away, shame and helplessness written on their faces. "Please, sir," Martha said, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this in front of my baby." "Shut your mouth." Grimes shoved her against the tree trunk. "Thomas," he yelled to one of the drivers, "get that baby off her back. And you," he pointed to Martha, "strip that shirt off, now." Humiliation burned through Martha hotter than any whip could. She stood there trembling, not from fear but from rage so deep it felt like her soul was on fire. This was the game they played, breaking you down, stripping away not just clothes but dignity, humanity, everything that made you a person instead of property. "I said strip," Grimes roared. Martha's hands moved slowly, mechanically, removing her rough cotton shirt while driver Thomas took crying baby Tom in his arms. Whispering apologies the child was too young to understand. Martha stood bare to the waist, arms crossed over her chest as Grimes tied her wrist to a low branch with rough hemp rope. "One night," he announced loud enough for every field hand to hear. "She gon' spend one night tied to the trunk in the yard. Let that be a lesson to all y'all about what happens when you disrespect your betters." But he couldn't resist adding more pain first. The whip sang through the air, and Martha bit down on her lips so hard she tasted blood. She wouldn't scream, wouldn't give him that satisfaction. The leather bit into her back once, twice, 3 times. Not enough to seriously damage Master Harrington's property, but enough to split skin and leave wounds that would scar forever. "That's for the disrespect," Grimes said, breathing hard from exertion and excitement. "The trunk's for the lesson." They untied her from the tree and half-dragged her back to the plantation yard, where that cursed oak stump waited. Lord have mercy. That trunk was massive, 3 feet across, cut from an ancient tree, its surface dark with the blood and suffering of countless souls who'd been punished there before. Iron rings had been driven into the wood, and rusty chains lay coiled beside it like metal snakes. Martha's back was on fire, blood running down her spine in warm rivulets. But she held her head high as they chained her to the trunk. They didn't nail her yet. That horror was still to come, months down the road. But the chains were tight enough to cut off circulation, tight enough to make her shoulders scream with pain as her arms were pulled back at unnatural angles. Master Harrington watched from his porch, sipping his afternoon mint julep like this was entertainment. His wife, Mistress Eleanor, turned away, one pale hand pressed to her mouth. But she didn't intervene. Never did. White women's tears couldn't trump white men's cruelty, not in that world. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky blood red, Martha hung there against the trunk. The other slaves had been sent back to work, warned that anyone who brought her water or comfort would join her in punishment. She was alone with her pain, alone with the mosquitoes that descended in clouds as darkness fell, alone with her thoughts that turned to Josiah and her babies. "Hold on, Chili, hold on," she heard the ancestors whisper in her mind. "This ain't your breaking, this is your forging. Steel has to go through fire before it becomes a blade." The first night was agony, muscles cramping, wounds burning, insects feasting on her exposed flesh. But somewhere around midnight, Martha began to sing. Soft at first, then stronger. A spiritual her mama had taught her, words in Wolof mixed with English. "O Lord, how long? How long till the morning? My soul cries out from this valley of sorrow, but I see the light coming over Jordan." From the quarters, hidden in the darkness, other voices joined hers. A hum at first, barely audible, then growing. The masters couldn't silence all of them, couldn't chain every voice. And in that communal song, Martha found strength she didn't know she possessed. When dawn finally broke and they unchained her to send her back to the fields, bleeding, exhausted, broken in body but not spirit, Martha saw something that made her blood run cold. Master Harrington was standing on his porch with a white man she'd never seen before, a slave trader by the looks of his ledger book and calculating eyes. And Grimes was pointing toward the quarters where the children slept. An auction was coming. Souls were about to be sold, and Martha's defiance had just painted a target on her family's back. In them days of deep sorrow, there was no sound more terrifying than the rattle of a slave trader's wagon rolling up the plantation drive. That sound meant families about to be torn apart, meant children ripped from their mama's arms, meant husbands and wives separated forever with nothing but memory to hold on to. And on that August morning in 1836, that devil's wagon came rolling into Harrington's plantation like death itself had arrived for breakfast. The trader's name was Caldwell, a thin, sharp-faced man with eyes like a hawk evaluating prey. He traveled with 2 assistants, rough men with clubs and pistols, ready to subdue any slave who might resist being sold. Behind his wagon came a coffle, a chain gang of enslaved people he'd already purchased from other plantations. 20 souls shackled neck to neck, stumbling along in the dust like a funeral procession. Master Harrington met him in the yard, all smiles and handshakes, talking business over whiskey while the enslaved community watched from the quarters with hearts full of dread. Folks say suffering so bad you could taste it in the air, thick as the humidity that pressed down on everything like a wet blanket. "I need young ones," Caldwell was saying, his voice carrying across the yard. "Market's hot in New Orleans for children 7 to 12. Can get premium prices, especially if they're healthy and don't give trouble." Martha heard those words from where she stood at the well, baby Tom on her hip, and her blood turned to ice water. 7 to 12. Ella was 6, almost 7, right in the trader's sweet spot. "Got several that might interest you," Master Harrington replied. "Let me have Grimes round them up." Lord have mercy. When that call went out for children to be brought to the yard, the quarters erupted in quiet chaos. Mothers clutching their babies, hiding them under beds, in root cellars, anywhere they might escape notice. But there was nowhere to hide, not really. The plantation was a prison with invisible walls, and everyone was trapped inside. Grimes went door to door with brutal efficiency, yanking children from their screaming mothers, dragging them out into the blazing August sun. Martha watched from the well, frozen in horror, as 12 children were lined up in the yard, including little Ella, who stood there in her ragged dress, tears streaming down her face but making no sound. That child had learned early that crying only made things worse. "Mama!" Ella finally broke, trying to run toward Martha, but Grimes caught her by the arm. "Stay put, gal," he snarled. "Your mama can't help you now." The auction block, that cursed platform of shame, had been set up near the trunk. Caldwell walked down the line of children like a man inspecting livestock, opening mouths to check teeth, squeezing arms to test muscle, looking for defects that might lower the price. Each child he examined, he made notes in his leather book with a stub of pencil. When he got to Ella, he stopped longer than the others. "This one's healthy, good teeth, strong for her age. Mulatto blood?" "No, sir," Master Harrington said. "Pure African stock. Mother and father both field hands." "Even better. The French in Louisiana pay premium for unmixed bloodlines." Caldwell lifted Ella's chin, studying her face. "She'll fetch 800 easy, maybe more." $800. That's what they valued her daughter's life at. Less than the cost of a good horse. Martha couldn't hold back no more. She ran forward, Tom still clutched to her chest, falling to her knees in the red clay at Master Harrington's feet. "Please, Massa, please don't sell my baby. I'll work harder, I'll do anything, just please." "Get up, Martha," Master Harrington said, not unkindly but not with mercy either. "I'm running a business here. Got debts to pay. You know how it is." "Please." Martha was weeping now, all dignity abandoned in the face of losing her child. "She all I got, take me instead, sell me." "Can't sell you," Grimes interjected with a cruel smile. "You're damaged goods now. Got them scars on your back, got a bad reputation for sass. Nobody'd pay half what that girl's worth." Caldwell was already writing up the sale papers, his pen scratching across the page like a death sentence being signed. Other mothers were on their knees too, begging, pleading. while their children stood on that auction block with faces blank from shock. Some of the older ones, the ones who'd seen this before, had that look in their eyes, the look of souls that had already left their bodies, fled to some safer place in their minds where pain couldn't reach. "Going to take 8 of these," Caldwell announced, "the stronger ones. Rest are too young or too sickly." He pointed out his selections, including Ella. A driver started loading the chosen children into the wagon, shackling their ankles with chains too heavy for their small frames. The sound of metal clicking shut was like thunder in Martha's ears. This was really happening. Her daughter was being sold away, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. But then, Mistress Eleanor appeared on the big house porch. She'd been watching from the window, and something, maybe maternal instinct, maybe guilt, maybe just a moment of human decency, made her intervene. "Wait," she called out in her soft Virginia drawl. "Mr. Caldwell, wait just a moment." Everyone froze. White women didn't usually interfere in plantation business, but when they did, men listened. "That one there," Mistress Eleanor pointed at Ella. "She's too young to be profitable yet. Won't bring her full value for another 2 years. If you're interested in maximum profit, you might reconsider." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. But it was a lie that gave Master Harrington an excuse to change his mind without losing face. Caldwell frowned, looking at Ella again, then at his ledger. "Well, suppose you might be right, ma'am. Child is a bit small yet. Take this one instead," Master Harrington said quickly, pointing to a 9-year-old boy named Samuel. "He's bigger, stronger, better return on investment." And just like that, Ella was unchained and Samuel was shackled in her place. Martha watched in numb relief and guilt as Samuel's mother collapsed in the dirt, wailing a sound that came from somewhere deeper than the throat, deeper than the chest, from the very bottom of the soul where grief lives. 7 children were loaded into Caldwell's wagon that day. 7 families torn apart. 7 mothers who would never see their babies again, never know if they lived or died, never hold them close or sing them to sleep. The wagon rolled away down that muddy road, and the sound of children crying faded into the distance like a nightmare you can't wake up from. Martha grabbed Ella and held her so tight the child could barely breathe, sobbing into her daughter's hair while Tom wailed in sympathy. "Thank you, Jesus," she kept repeating. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." But that night, after the terror had passed, and the quarters had settled into an uneasy quiet punctuated by the sound of mothers weeping in the dark, Grimes came to Martha's cabin door. "You got real lucky today," he said, his silhouette dark against the moonlight. "Mistress spoke up for you. But luck don't last forever, Martha. And next time there's an auction, maybe I'll make sure Mistress ain't around to interfere." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut like a knife. "You should have been more grateful to me. Should have been sweeter when you had the chance. Now you gon' learn what happens to women who think they too proud to be touched." "What you want from me?" Martha asked, her voice hollow with exhausted despair. Grimes smiled in the darkness. "You'll find out soon enough. Real soon." He walked away, leaving Martha standing in her cabin doorway with her children sleeping behind her, and her heart full of a dread so deep it felt like drowning. The auction had passed, but the real danger was just beginning, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard the ancestors whisper, "The trunk is waiting, daughter. Your blood has been promised. But remember, you will bleed, and then the trunk will bleed too." The storm was gathering, and Martha stood at the center of it, with nowhere to run and everything to lose. Now you see, people, evil don't always come riding in on a black horse announcing itself with thunder. Sometimes it comes creeping slow, patient as a snake waiting in tall grass, biding its time till you let your guard down. And Grimes, that devil in white skin, he was patient. He'd been circling Martha like a buzzard over carrion, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came on a late September afternoon, when the cotton needed ginning and most of the field hands were occupied with the harvest. Martha had been sent to the big barn, a massive wooden structure that smelled of hay, horsehide, and old sweat, to fetch tools for the evening work. The barn stood away from the quarters, isolated behind the smokehouse, a place where screams might not carry far enough for help to come. Martha should have known better than to go alone. Should have felt the danger hanging in the air, thick as the humidity that pressed down on Virginia that day. But she was tired, bone-tired from 12 hours under that skin and heat, tired from the constant vigilance required just to survive as a woman in bondage, tired from nightmares about auction blocks and wagons carrying children away forever. She was bent over a tool chest, searching for the cotton hooks Grimes had demanded, when she heard the barn door slam shut behind her. The sudden darkness made her heart jump like a rabbit sensing the fox. "Looking for something?" Grimes's voice came from behind her, slurred with whiskey but steady with purpose. Martha straightened up slowly, her hands trembling. "Just getting the tools you asked for, sir." "Tools can wait." He moved closer, and she could smell him now. Sweat, liquor, and something darker. Something predatory. "You and me need to have us a conversation about respect. About gratitude." "Please, sir," Martha said, backing up until her spine hit the tool chest. "I need to get back to work. They waiting on these hooks?" "I said the tools can wait." Grimes lunged forward, grabbing her wrist with fingers like iron shackles. "You been walking around here like you better than the other gals. Like you too good to be touched. But you ain't better, Martha. You just property, same as that horse in the stall yonder. And I'm tired of waiting for what's mine to take." "I'm married," Martha shouted, trying to yank her arm free. "I got a husband, got children." "That blacksmith?" Grimes laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "He ain't nothing but a slave just like you. Can't protect you, can't save you. Hell, I could have him sold tomorrow if I wanted. Or maybe I'll just break both his hands in the forge, make him useless so Master has to get rid of him anyway." Sweet Jesus. The fear that shot through Martha then was like lightning in her veins. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Josiah, about the children, about everything she loved being used as leverage to break her will. "Don't you touch my family," Martha said, and her voice came out different than before. Not pleading, not afraid. Cold as December rain. "I'll touch whoever I damn well please." Grimes shoved her back against the wall, pinning her there with his body weight. His breath was hot and foul against her face, whiskey and rotted teeth. "You know, you can make this easy or you can make it hard, but either way." That's when Martha struck. Her fingernails raked across his face, digging deep furrows from temple to jaw. Grimes screamed and stumbled backward, blood running down his cheek in bright red rivulets. Martha didn't wait to see his reaction. She grabbed the first thing her hand found, a wooden rake handle, and swung it with all the strength 20 years of fieldwork had built into her arms. The handle connected with Grimes's shoulder, a solid crack that echoed in the barn. He went down on one knee, cursing a blue streak that would have made the devil himself blush. Martha ran for the door, but Grimes was faster than he looked. He grabbed her ankle and yanked hard, sending her crashing face first into the dirt floor. "You goddamn bitch," he roared, crawling on top of her, fist raised to strike. "You just signed your own death warrant. You and that whole worthless family of yours." But Martha wasn't done fighting. She twisted like a wildcat, got her knee up into his groin hard enough to make him howl and roll off her. She scrambled to her feet, grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the wall and pointed the rusted tines at him like a weapon of war. "You come near me again," she panted, "and I swear before God and my ancestors, I'll put this through your black heart." They stood there frozen for a moment, overseer and enslaved woman, predator and prey turned dangerous. Blood dripped from Grimes's face onto the hay-strewn floor. His eyes were wild with rage and something else. Shocked realization that he'd underestimated this woman, that she had fight in her he hadn't accounted for. "You just made the worst mistake of your miserable life," Grimes said, his voice shaking with fury. "You think that one night on the trunk was punishment? You ain't seen nothing yet, gal, nothing." He stood up slowly, dabbing at his bleeding face with his sleeve, never taking his eyes off her. "Master Harrington!" he bellowed, loud enough to be heard clear across the plantation. "Master, I need you at the barn. Got us a situation." Martha's heart sank like a stone in deep water. She lowered the pitchfork, knowing it was over. You could fight back once, maybe twice, but there was no winning in the end. The system was designed to crush resistance, to punish defiance with such brutal efficiency that most folks learned to submit just to survive. Within minutes, Master Harrington came striding across the yard with 2 field drivers in tow. He took one look at Grimes's bleeding face and Martha standing there with the pitchfork, and his expression went hard as granite. "She attacked me," Grimes spat. "Came at me like a wild animal. I was just asking her to fetch tools like I'd been told, and she tried to kill me." "That's a lie," Martha said desperately. "He tried to—" But she stopped, knowing that speaking the truth wouldn't save her, might even make it worse. White men didn't want to hear about overseers raping enslaved women. They knew it happened, but naming it out loud was a transgression almost as bad as the rape itself. Master Harrington looked at her for a long moment, and Martha saw something in his eyes. Not quite sympathy, but maybe acknowledgement. He knew what Grimes had been trying to do. Everyone knew. But knowing and acting on that knowledge were 2 different things. "Grimes," Master Harrington said carefully, "you been drinking again?" "That ain't relevant," Grimes shouted. "She attacked me. She needs to be punished severe, or every slave on this plantation gon' think they can raise a hand against white folks." Master Harrington sighed, running a hand through his hair. He was trapped by the logic of the system he benefited from. Couldn't show mercy without undermining his own authority. "Martha, you know I can't let this stand." "Yes, sir," Martha whispered, because what else could she say? 50 nights, Grimes said, his voice dripping venom and satisfaction. "I want her on the trunk for 50 nights. Nailed, not chained. Let her scream till she learns her lesson." 50 nights. Nobody had ever survived 50 nights nailed to the trunk. The longest anyone had lasted was 20, and that man died 3 days after they pulled the spikes out, infection eating him from the inside. "That's excessive," Master Harrington began, but Grimes cut him off. "Look at my face. She scarred me permanent. If we don't make an example, we'll have rebellion on our hands." And so it was decided, right there in the barn with Martha standing witness to her own sentencing. 50 nights nailed to the trunk, starting at sundown. The punishment was announced to the entire plantation community, called together in the yard to watch justice. Their word, not ours, being served. Josiah heard the news in the blacksmith shop and came running, his face twisted with anguish. They held him back as Martha was led to the trunk, 4 men restraining him as he shouted and fought like a man possessed. "I love you," he screamed. "Martha, I love you. Stay strong." Martha looked at him one last time, memorizing his face, storing it away in her heart against the long darkness ahead. Then she looked at Ella and Tom, both crying in Aunt Zilpha's arms, their young faces already marked by trauma no child should know. "Be good," Martha called to them. "Mind your daddy. And remember, your mama loves you more than life itself." As they positioned her against the trunk and brought out the iron spikes and the hammer, Martha closed her eyes and began to pray. Not the prayers they'd taught her in the praise house, but older prayers in languages she didn't consciously know, but that lived in her blood, passed down through generations from Africa to this cursed red clay of Virginia. The first spike went through her left palm, and Martha screamed. The long night had begun. Listen close now, children of the forgotten ones, 'cause what I's about to tell you is suffering so bad, it makes the soul weep just remembering. Them first 10 nights Martha spent nailed to that cursed trunk were a descent into hell itself. A journey through pain so deep it had colors and sounds of its own. The first spike went through her left palm with a sound like thunder in her ears. Martha screamed. "Lord have mercy," she screamed like her lungs would burst, as the iron punched through flesh and bone, pinning her hand to the scarred wood. The second spike through her right palm came quicker, Grimes swinging that hammer with the enthusiasm of a man enjoying his work. Blood ran down her arms in warm rivers, black as tar in the fading twilight. 50 nights, Grimes whispered in her ear as he stepped back to admire his handiwork. "Wonder if you'll last 20. They left her there as darkness fell like a shroud over the plantation. The other slaves had been ordered back to their quarters, warned that anyone who brought her water or comfort would join her in punishment. But Martha wasn't alone. Not really. The mosquitoes came first, descending in clouds so thick they looked like smoke in the moonlight, drawn by the scent of blood and sweat. They covered every inch of exposed skin, biting, feasting, till Martha's face swelled up like a grotesque mask. The pain in her hands was fire incarnate, flames shooting up her arms with every heartbeat. She tried not to move, but the body has its own wisdom. It shifts and adjusts without permission, seeking relief that don't exist. Every tiny movement pulled against the spikes, tearing flesh, grinding iron against bone. By midnight of that first night, Martha was delirious with agony, crying out to God, to her mama, to the ancestors whose names she'd never learned. "Yamoja!" she screamed, calling on the Yoruba goddess of the ocean her grandmother had whispered about. "Oshun, Shango, somebody help me!" But the only answer was the wind through the live oaks and the distant sound of hounds baying in the dark. When dawn finally came, that first morning after the first night, they pulled the spikes out with the same casual cruelty they'd driven them in. Martha's screams echoed across the plantation as Grimes yanked the iron free, leaving holes in her palms you could see daylight through. Blood poured fresh from the wounds, and Martha collapsed into the red clay, her body shaking with shock. "Get up," a driver named Moses said, not unkindly. "You got cotton to pick." Sweet Jesus, they expected her to work, expected her to drag herself to the fields with hands that looked like raw meat, with a body that had been tortured all night. But that was the genius of the punishment. The cruelty had layers. Night brought the nails, day brought labor, and there was no rest, no respite, just an endless cycle of suffering designed to break the spirit completely. Martha stumbled to the cotton fields, her hands wrapped in rags torn from her own dress. Every bowl she touched sent lightning bolts of pain up her arms. Blood soaked through the rags within an hour, attracting flies that buzzed around her like tiny demons. The other field hands worked in heavy-hearted silence, not daring to help but their eyes speaking volumes. Sympathy, horror, and gratitude that it wasn't them. By the second night, infection had set in. The spike holes in her palms were red and swollen, weeping pus that smelled like death. When they nailed her to the trunk again, the pain was somehow worse than the first time. Like every nerve in her body was on fire. Martha vomited from the agony, her stomach heaving till there was nothing left but bile. That second night, the ancestors came to her. Not in dreams, as she was too far gone for sleep, but in visions that shimmered in the air like heat mirages. She saw her grandmother, the one who'd been taken from Senegal in chains, standing before the trunk with her hands raised in blessing. "You strong daughter," the vision said in a language Martha shouldn't understand but did. "You got iron in your blood, this fire forging you into something the white man can't break. I can't do this," Martha whispered through cracked, bleeding lips. "I'ma die here." "Maybe you will," the ancestor said, and her honesty was almost comforting. "But if you do, you die fighting. And if you live, you rise up like thunder." The third night brought fever. Martha's body was burning from the inside out, fighting infections, fighting trauma, fighting to survive against odds that seemed impossible. She hallucinated conversations with her daddy Kofi, sold away when she was 5. He sat beside the trunk, his face as clear as if he were really there. "I'm sorry I left you, baby girl," he said. "Sorry I couldn't protect you. Wasn't your fault, Daddy," Martha whispered. "None of this is our fault." By the fourth night, word had spread through the slave quarters that Martha was dying. Aunt Zilpha, that old root doctor with wisdom deeper than the earth, defied the orders and crept out to the trunk under cover of darkness. She carried a mojo bag filled with high John root, devil's shoestring, and other herbs of power. "Can't take the nails out, child," Zilpha whispered, pressing the bag against Martha's chest. "But I can give you strength from the ancestors. You carry this close to your heart. It ward off the worst of the fever, give you courage to hold on." "How many nights passed?" Martha asked, her voice barely audible. 4. "You got 46 more to go." The number hit Martha like a fist. 46 more nights of this. Impossible. No human being could survive that. But even as despair threatened to swallow her whole, something else stirred inside her chest. Something hard and cold and furious. Rage. Pure, undiluted rage at a system that could do this to human beings. Rage at Grimes, at Master Harrington, at every white person who'd ever claimed ownership over black flesh. That rage became her anchor. When the pain threatened to drive her mad, she held on to that anger like a lifeline. When infection made her delirious, she channeled that fury into will, the determination to survive just to spite them all. The fifth night, it rained. Not a gentle rain, but a downpour that turned the plantation yard into a sea of red mud. Martha hung there on the trunk, unable to seek shelter, water streaming down her body, washing the blood and pus from her wounds but bringing its own misery. The cold seeped into her bones, making her teeth chatter so hard she bit her tongue till it bled. But in the rain, Martha heard the ancestors singing. Their voices rose from the earth itself, from the soil soaked with the blood and tears of countless enslaved souls. They sang in Yoruba, in Wolof, in Fon, in languages stolen and almost forgotten, and Martha sang with them, her voice cracking but strong. We are not broken. We are not broken. Though they chain our bodies, our spirits fly free. We are the children of kings and queens, and no master can take that from we. The sixth night, Josiah came. He wasn't supposed to. It could cost him his life. But love makes men brave in ways nothing else can. He crept to the trunk in the dead of night and knelt in the mud beside Martha's dangling feet. I'm here, baby, he whispered. I'm right here with you. Josiah. Martha breathed his name like a prayer. The children? Scared but safe, Aunt Zilpha keeping them calm. They ask for you every hour. Tell them Mama's strong. Tell them I'ma survive this. You will, Josiah said fiercely. You the strongest woman I ever known. Them devils think they breaking you, but all they doing is forging steel. He pulled something from his pocket, a piece of cornbread, fresh and still warm. He fed it to Martha in small bites, and the taste of it, the simple human kindness of being fed when you're helpless, made her weep harder than the pain ever had. I can't stay long, Josiah said. But I got something for you. Something for when the time's right. He pressed something small and cold into the waistband of her skirt, hidden where the overseers wouldn't see. A knife, stolen from the forge, sharp as sin and twice as dangerous. When you need it, you'll know, he said. I believe in you, Martha. I believe you gon' do something these white folks never forget. By the seventh night, Martha had stopped screaming. The pain was still there, would always be there. But she'd learned to exist alongside it, to make room for it in her consciousness without letting it consume her entirely. This was survival in its purest form, not overcoming suffering, but learning to carry it. The eighth night brought Grimes, drunk and mean, poking at her wounds with a stick. You still alive? Damn, you harder to kill than a cockroach. Martha looked at him with eyes that had seen hell and come back changed. I'ma outlive you, she said, her voice like gravel. And when I do, I'ma dance on your grave. Grimes laughed, but there was uncertainty in it. Something in Martha's gaze unsettled him, made him take a step back without realizing he was doing it. The ninth night was the hardest yet. Martha's hands had gone numb, circulation cut off for so long that she couldn't feel the spikes anymore. She watched her fingers turn blue-black in the moonlight, and knew that even if she survived, she'd never have full use of her hands again. She'd be marked forever, crippled, a living testimony to what happens when enslaved women fight back. But she'd also be alive, and alive meant there was still a chance for freedom, still a chance for justice. The 10th night, Martha had a vision that felt more real than reality. She saw herself standing free on the other side of this ordeal, saw herself holding a blade dripping with Grimes's blood, saw herself walking north with her children toward the drinking gourd. That constellation the white folks called the Big Dipper, but enslaved people knew as the map to freedom. Hold on, the ancestors whispered. Just 10 more nights and something gon' shift. 20 more and the path becomes clear. 50 more and you'll be reborn. When dawn broke on the 11th morning, Martha was still breathing, still defiant, still unbroken. And the trunk? That cursed Stump was beginning to understand it had met its match. Now listen here, child, 'cause this is where the story takes a turn nobody expected, not even Martha herself. Somewhere between the 11th and the 30th night, something shifted in the spiritual realm. The suffering didn't stop, Lord, no, but it transformed into something else entirely. Martha stopped being the victim and became the vessel, became the witness, became the voice. On the 11th night, after they'd nailed her to the trunk as usual, and the overseers had gone to their beds, Martha began to sing. Not the spirituals they sang in the praise house under white supervision, but older songs, dangerous songs, songs in languages that predated slavery itself. Her voice cracked and broken, barely above a whisper, but it carried on the night wind like smoke from a sacred fire. Eshu Elegbara, guardian of the crossroads, open the way for your daughter in chains. Yamoja, mother of waters, wash clean these wounds with your tears. Oya, warrior woman of the winds, give me your strength to endure. The words came from somewhere deep inside her, from that place where ancestral memory lives, passed down through bloodlines even when the conscious mind forgets. And something answered. The air around the trunk grew thick and heavy, charged with a presence that made the hair on every slave's neck stand on end, even those sleeping in their cabins 100 yards away. Old Aunt Zilpha, lying awake in her quarters, felt it and smiled in the darkness. The ancestors riding her now, she whispered to herself, that girl becoming something powerful. By the 12th night, other slaves began creeping closer to the trunk after the overseers retired, drawn by Martha's singing like moths to flame. They couldn't help her directly, couldn't remove the nails or bring her down, but they could bear witness. They could be present. And in that witnessing, in that refusal to let her suffer alone, something sacred was born. A young field hand named Jacob was the first to join his voice to hers. Then Sarah, a woman who'd lost 3 children to the auction block. Then old brother Samuel, the unofficial preacher of the quarters. One by one, they came and stood in a circle around the trunk, humming low, swaying gentle, creating a ring shout right there in the danger of night. "What y'all doing?" Martha whispered, tears streaming down her swollen face. "You gon' get punished." "Hush now, sister," Brother Samuel said. "We in this together. Always have been. They can chain our bodies, but they can't stop us from lifting each other up." From that night on, Martha wasn't alone. Every evening after the nails went in, after the overseers had drunk themselves to sleep, the community gathered. They couldn't stay long, couldn't make too much noise, but they came. They brought sips of water in cupped hands, whispered prayers, shared news from the plantation. Most importantly, they bore witness to Martha's suffering and transformed it from isolated torture into communal resistance. On the 15th night, Martha began to prophesy. The words came pouring out of her mouth unbidden, visions of the future mixing with memories of the past. "I see chains breaking," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "I see a war coming, blood and fire, brother fighting brother. I see Abraham raising his hand over this land, speaking words that change everything. I see us walking free, walking north, walking toward the promised land." The slaves around the trunk went silent, stunned. They knew about Abraham Lincoln, that new politician up north who opposed slavery's expansion. But war, freedom, these were dangerous thoughts, the kind that could get you killed just for speaking them. "When?" someone asked. "When this freedom coming?" "Not in my time," Martha said, and her certainty was chilling. "But in the time of the children, in 25 years, maybe 30. The young ones here tonight, they gon' see it. This I know like I know my own name." Nobody knew if Martha was truly seeing the future, or if fever and trauma had driven her mad. But her words took root in their hearts like seeds planted in fertile soil. Hope, that dangerous emotion, began to bloom. By the 20th night, Martha's body had reached its breaking point. The infection in her hands had spread up her arms, red streaks racing toward her heart like warning flags. She was burning with fever, hallucinating more than she was lucid. Aunt Zilpha brought poultices made from plantain leaves and spider webs, pressing them to Martha's wounds when the overseers weren't looking. "You hanging on by a thread, child," Zilpha whispered. "But that thread is made of iron. You gon' make it, hear me? You gon' make it 'cause the ancestors won't let you go. They got plans for you." That 20th night, Josiah came again, risking everything. He knelt in the mud and held Martha's feet, the only part of her body he could touch without causing more pain. "I got news," he said quietly. "Bad news and worse news." "Tell me," Martha breathed. "Grimes been talking, says on the 50th night he gon' do more than just nail you down. Says he gon' finish what he started in the barn, and ain't nobody gon' stop him. He planning it like a celebration, Martha, like his reward for breaking you." Martha's eyes, fever-bright and wild, fixed on her husband. "And the worst news? Master Harrington leaving for Richmond that night. Gon' be gone 3 days on business. Mistress Eleanor, too. Grimes gon' have free reign over this whole plantation." In Martha's chest, something cold and hard crystallized. The rage that had been sustaining her suddenly had direction, had purpose. She thought about the knife Josiah had hidden in her clothing, still there, still waiting. She thought about 50 nights of torture and the promise of more violation to come. And she made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. "Good," she said, and her smile was terrifying. "Let him come. Let him think he won. On that 50th night, I'ma teach him what happens when you mistake endurance for surrender." Josiah stared at her, understanding dawning in his eyes along with fear. "Martha, what you planning?" "Justice," she said simply. "In blood and iron, same as this country was built. You just make sure you're ready to run when the time comes. You, the children, and anybody else with courage enough to seek freedom." "That's suicide," Josiah said. "They'll hunt us down." "Maybe," Martha agreed. "But I'd rather die free in the swamp than live one more day as property. You with me or not?" Josiah was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. "I'm with you, always have been. Till death or freedom, whichever comes first." The 25th night brought a terrible storm. Wind howled through the live oaks, rain lashed the plantation, and lightning split the sky like the world was ending. Martha hung on the trunk through it all, her body a lightning rod for nature's fury. The other slaves couldn't come out in weather like that, so she was alone with her pain and her plans. But in the heart of that storm, Martha felt something shift inside her. The fever broke with a crack like thunder, sweat pouring from her body, washing away the delirium. For the first time in 2 weeks, her mind was clear, sharp, focused. She took inventory of her body, hands ruined but still attached, arms infected but healing, spirit battered but unbroken. She was alive. Against all odds, she was still alive. "Thank you," she whispered to the ancestors. "Thank you for keeping me here. Now use me as your weapon." The 30th night marked the end of one phase and the beginning of another. Martha had survived what no one thought possible. Slaves on neighboring plantations heard about her endurance and whispered her name with reverence. Martha do Tronco, the woman who wouldn't break. Some said she had powerful conjure protecting her. Others said she was possessed by warrior spirits from Africa. All agreed she was more than just a field hand anymore. She'd become a symbol, a living testament to the strength that survives in even the most brutal circumstances. That night, Grimes came to inspect his handiwork, expecting to find Martha barely conscious, ready to beg for mercy. Instead, he found her staring at him with eyes like burning coals, singing a song in a language he didn't understand, her voice strong despite her ruined body. "What the hell you singing?" he demanded, disturbed by something he couldn't name. Martha smiled, and her smile was death itself. "A promise," she said in English. "In 20 more nights, I'ma keep it." Grimes felt a chill run down his spine. "You threatening me, gal?" "No, sir," Martha said sweetly. "Just telling you what I seen in my visions. The ancestors showed me a white man bleeding out in the dirt. Funny thing, he looked just like you." Grimes struck her across the face, but Martha just laughed. She'd gone beyond fear now, beyond caring what they could do to her. Pain had burned away everything except the essential core of her being, and what remained was pure, concentrated will. 20 more nights, she said again. Count them careful. As Grimes walked away, unsettled and angry, the slaves watching from the quarters saw something they'd never seen before. An overseer, a white man with absolute power, looking afraid of one of them. The balance had shifted, subtle but undeniable. Martha hung on the trunk, counting down the nights like a woman counting down to her wedding day. Except the ceremony she was planning wouldn't involve vows and rings. It would involve steel and blood, and a reckoning 2 decades in the making. The ancestors whispered approval in the wind. The spirits gathered close, preparing for the violence to come. And Martha. Martha sharpened her resolve like Josiah sharpened iron in his forge, with heat and pressure and the absolute certainty that what she was making would cut true. 20 more nights, then freedom or death. And honestly, to Martha, they were beginning to feel like the same thing. Now you see, people, the most dangerous enslaved person is the one who stopped fearing death. And Martha, sweet Jesus, Martha had passed through that fear like a woman walking through fire and coming out made of iron. The nights between 30 and 49 were a countdown to Judgment Day, and everyone on that plantation could feel it coming like thunder on the horizon. On the 31st night, word began to spread beyond Harrington's plantation. Slaves working neighboring properties heard about Martha de Tronco, the woman nailed to a stump for defying her overseer, the woman who sang prophecies in the dark, the woman who'd survived longer than anyone thought possible. Runaways passing through on the Underground Railroad detoured just to catch a glimpse of her, to carry her story north where abolitionists would print it in their papers, adding fuel to the growing fire of resistance. Martha's body was a ruin now, child. Her hands were twisted claws, the nail holes never properly healed, infection and trauma leaving them permanently damaged. She'd lost 30 pounds from a frame that couldn't afford to lose 10. Her back bore fresh scars from the nightly nailing and daily labor. But her eyes, Lord have mercy, her eyes burned with a light that made strong men look away. 19 more nights, she told Grimes when he came to supervise the nailing on the 31st evening. You counting? 'Cause I am. Every single one. Shut your mouth, Grimes snapped, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. The other overseers had started to notice it too, the way he avoided Martha's gaze, the way his hands shook slightly when he drove the spikes. Fear was seeping into him like water through cracked wood. By the 35th night, the plan was taking shape. Josiah had been working in secret, hiding tools and supplies in the swamp, food wrapped in oilcloth and buried in waterproof containers, old shoes collected from the quarters, a compass stolen from Master Harrington's study, maps drawn from memory by slaves who'd tried to run before and been caught, their knowledge now weapons in other hands. How many coming with us? Martha whispered during one of Josiah's midnight visits. Maybe 20, he said. Families mostly. Folks with children old enough to travel but young enough to still have hope. Brother Samuel want to come. Aunt Zilpha say she too old for running, but she giving us her blessing and her root work for protection. Martha nodded, her mind working through scenarios. We need a distraction. Something big enough that the patty rollers look the wrong way while we slip into the swamp. What you thinking? Martha's smile was grim. Fire cleanses everything, don't it? The 40th night brought an unexpected visitor, a slave from the neighboring Miller plantation, a man named Isaiah who had the second sight, came seeking Martha. He'd walked 15 miles in the dark, risking his life because he'd had a vision. Sister, he said, kneeling in the mud by the trunk. I seen you in a dream, seen you with a blade in your hand and a white man's blood on your clothes, seen you leading people north like Moses leading Israel out of Egypt. But I also seen danger, dogs and guns and a rope waiting. I know the risks, Martha said. Do you? Isaiah's eyes were intense. Do you know that what you planning gonna start something bigger than just one plantation? That every slave in Virginia gonna hear about Martha de Tronco stabbing her overseer? That master's gonna tighten the chains on everyone 'cause they terrified of another rebellion like Nat Turner? Martha was quiet for a long moment. She'd heard about Nat Turner, the enslaved preacher who'd led a revolt in Virginia just 5 years earlier, killing dozens of white people before being caught and hanged. The reprisals had been horrific. Hundreds of black people murdered in retaliation, laws tightened, restrictions increased. "So what you saying?" Martha finally asked. "That I should just accept what he planning to do to me? Accept that my children gon' grow up in bondage? Accept that this system gon' keep grinding us down forever?" "No," Isaiah said firmly. "I'm saying you need to understand what you carrying. Your pain ain't just your own anymore. It's become a symbol. What you do with it gon' ripple out like stones thrown in a pond. You ready for that responsibility?" Martha looked up at the stars, at the drinking gourd pointing north toward freedom, toward the land where slavery was still legal but loosening its grip, where the movement for abolition was growing stronger every day. "I'm ready," she said. "Whatever consequences come, I'm ready. 'Cause doing nothing has consequences too, and I'd rather face judgment for fighting back than face my ancestors having never tried." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Then I got something for you." He pulled a small leather pouch from his shirt. "Gopher dust, made from graveyard dirt, sulfur, and the crushed bones of a snake. You put this on that overseer and his death gonna be slow and painful. Old folks say it works on the spirit too, that he'll wander lost between worlds, never finding peace." Martha took the pouch with her ruined hands, tucking it into her clothes next to the knife. "Thank you, brother. Don't thank me yet. Just promise me something. When you get north, when you free, you tell the story. You tell everyone what it cost. You make sure our suffering wasn't for nothing." "I promise," Martha said. "On my life and my children's lives, I promise." The 45th night, disaster struck. Josiah was in the blacksmith shop preparing tools for the escape when an overseer named Crawford came in drunk and belligerent. Crawford had been nursing a grudge against Josiah for months, jealous of the respect the enslaved community showed the blacksmith. "Heard your wife's a whore," Crawford slurred, leaning against the forge. "Heard she been spreading her legs for Grimes, and that's why she on the trunk. Punishment for getting caught." Josiah's hand stilled on the iron he was working. "Say that again," he said quietly. "You heard me, boy. Your wife's a—" He never finished the sentence. Josiah swung the red-hot poker he'd been heating, connecting with Crawford's jaw with a sickening crack. The overseer went down hard, blood and broken teeth spilling onto the shop floor. For a moment, everything froze. Then Crawford started screaming, and all hell broke loose. Within minutes, the alarm was raised. Slaves were dragged from their quarters, overseers formed a search party, and Josiah was found trying to flee into the swamp with the children. They brought him back in chains, beat him nearly to death in the yard, and tied him to a post next to the trunk where Martha hung. "Josiah!" Martha screamed, her voice raw with anguish. "No! No!" His face was a mess of blood and bruises, one eye swollen shut, ribs clearly broken from the beating. But he managed to turn his head toward her, managed to smile with split lips. "Don't cry for me, baby," he whispered. "I'd do it again. Nobody talks about my wife like that." Master Harrington stood on his porch, watching the scene with cold calculation. "Well, Josiah, you just made this real simple. Was going to let you keep working the forge, being as your valuable property. But attacking a white man, that's a hanging offense." "No!" Martha thrashed against her nails, tearing her palms worse. "Please. He's my husband. He's the father of my children." "Should have thought about that before he went crazy," Master Harrington said. "Grimes, have a noose ready. We'll hang him at dawn, right here where everyone can see what happens to violent Negroes." The 46th night was the longest of Martha's life. She hung on the trunk with Josiah tied to the post beside her, both of them bleeding, both of them broken, but still somehow together. They talked through the darkness, sharing memories, making promises they both knew might never be kept. "Tell Ella and Tom I loved them more than life," Josiah said as false dawn began to lighten the sky. "Tell them their daddy was a man, not just a slave. Tell them—" "You gon' tell them yourself," Martha interrupted, her mind racing. "I got a plan. Ain't pretty and it might not work, but "Martha, don't do nothing foolish," Josiah said urgently. "You and the children got a chance to survive this. Don't throw it away trying to save me." "We don't leave family behind," Martha said fiercely. "Never have, never will." But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. The noose was already prepared. The sun was rising, and Josiah's time was running out like sand through an hourglass. At dawn, they pulled the nails from Martha's hands and untied Josiah from his post. The entire enslaved community was forced to gather in the yard to witness the execution, a warning, a lesson, a reminder of their powerlessness. Little Ella and Tom stood with Aunt Zilpha, both children crying silently, too traumatized to even make sound. They put the noose around Josiah's neck, the rough hemp scratching his skin. Grimes held the other end of the rope, grinning like the devil himself. "Any last words, boy?" Josiah looked out at the assembled slaves, his people, his community. Then he looked at Martha, memorizing her face one last time. "Run," he said clearly. "All y'all who got the courage, or run. Freedom's worth dying for. And Martha," his voice broke, "I'll be waiting for you. On the other side of Jordan, I'll be waiting." "Now!" Grimes shouted. But before they could pull the rope tight, before Josiah's feet could leave the ground, something impossible happened. The sky, which had been clear and bright, suddenly darkened. Clouds rolled in from nowhere, thick and black as smoke, and thunder shook the ground. Lightning split the air so close that everyone could smell the ozone, could feel their hair standing on end. "The ancestors!" Aunt Zilpha shouted. "The ancestors is angry." In the confusion, in those few seconds when everyone's attention was on the sky, Martha made her move. The knife Josiah had given her weeks ago was still hidden in her clothes. With hands that could barely grip, hands twisted and ruined from the nails, she grabbed it and stumbled toward the execution post. What happened next, people still argue about to this day. Some say Martha cut the rope before Josiah was hung. Some say the lightning struck the post and broke it in half. Some say the storm was just a storm, and the rope was just old and frayed. But everyone agrees on what came after. In the chaos of the storm, Martha and Josiah ran. They grabbed their children from Aunt Zilpha's arms and fled toward the swamp, running like their lives depended on it, because they did. Behind them, they could hear Grimes screaming orders, dogs being released, patty rollers mounting up. 4 more nights, Martha panted as they crashed through the underbrush. Just needed 4 more nights. "We making our own schedule now," Josiah said, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. "Freedom can't wait." They ran through that storm, the ancestors' fury covering their escape, washing away their scent from the dogs. Behind them, Harrington's plantation descended into chaos. And ahead? Ahead lay the swamp, and beyond that, the long road north. But Martha still had unfinished business, still had a promise to keep. And Grimes was still alive, for now. Listen close now, children of the forgotten ones, 'cause this is where blood and freedom kissed in the darkness, where justice wore the face of vengeance, and where Martha du Tronco became legend. They didn't make it far that first day. How could they, with Josiah beaten near to death, Martha's hands ruined from the nails, and 2 terrified children stumbling through swamp water up to their knees? The bayou swallowed them like a merciful mouth, cypress trees thick as prison bars, but offering protection instead of confinement. Spanish moss hung low, curtains of gray-green that hid them from the patty rollers' eyes. They waded through black water that smelled of rot and life intermingled, past cottonmouth snakes sunning on logs, through clouds of mosquitoes that fed on their already damaged flesh. "We can't stop," Martha panted, pulling little Tom through the muck while Ella clung to Josiah's torn shirt. "They'll have the dogs out soon as that storm passes." "I know," Josiah said, his voice weak from blood loss. "But baby, I can't go much further." They found shelter in a hollow cypress tree, its trunk wide enough to hide a family, its roots forming a natural cave above the waterline. Martha tore strips from her dress to bind Josiah's wounds while the children huddled together, too shocked to even cry anymore. "How long you think we got?" Josiah asked. Till nightfall, maybe, Martha said. That storm scattered our scent, and the swamp's too dangerous for white men to search in daylight. But come dark, when the water settles. She didn't need to finish, they both knew what was coming. Then we need a plan that ain't just running, Josiah said. We need to buy time. Need to make them hesitate, make them afraid. Martha's hand went to the knife still hidden in her waistband, then to the pouch of gopher dust Isaiah had given her. An idea was forming, terrible and beautiful at the same time. What if I go back? She said quietly. You lost your mind. Josiah tried to sit up, winced from broken ribs. They'll kill you. Maybe, Martha agreed. Or maybe I finish what should have been finished 49 nights ago. Maybe I make Grimes pay for everything, every woman he touched, every family he broke, every soul he tortured. And in the chaos, you take the children north. Get to the next station on the railroad. The folks there will help you. I ain't leaving you, Josiah said fiercely. We run together or we die together. The children need a parent who can protect them, Martha said, and her voice was iron. Look at your hands, Josiah. You can still work, still provide. Look at mine. She held up her twisted, nail-scarred palms. I'm marked forever, crippled, but I can still hold a knife. I can still be useful one last time. They argued in whispers while the children slept, exhaustion finally claiming them. But by the time the sun started its descent, painting the swamp in shades of blood and gold, Josiah knew he'd lost the argument. Martha had that look in her eyes, the same look she'd had on the trunk, the look that said death itself couldn't turn her from her purpose. If you doing this, Josiah said, then do it right. Make it count. Make every white person in Virginia hear about Martha de Tronco, and remember that slaves ain't property. We're human beings with human rage. As darkness fell, Martha prepared herself like a warrior going into battle. Aunt Zilpha had taught her the rituals, and though she didn't have all the proper materials, she made do. She rubbed the gopher dust on the knife's blade, whispering invocations in Yoruba she'd learned from the old ones. She marked her forehead with mud from the swamp, the boundary between worlds, between the living and the dead. She sang low, calling on Oya, warrior goddess of the winds, and Shango, god of thunder and justice. I am your weapon, she prayed. I am your vengeance, use me as you will. She kissed her children goodbye, each kiss a benediction and a farewell. She held Josiah one last time, their bodies pressed together in the hollow tree, memorizing the feel of him, the smell of him, the sound of his heart beating against her chest. I love you, she whispered, in this life and the next. I love you. Till we meet again on the other side of Jordan, Josiah said, tears streaming down his battered face. Then Martha disappeared into the swamp night like a ghost returning to haunt the living. She moved through the darkness with purpose, guided by instinct and fury. The plantation was in chaos when she arrived. Torches burning, dogs barking, overseers shouting orders. They were organizing a search party for first light, thinking their escaped slaves were miles away by now. Nobody expected one of them to come back. Martha watched from the edge of the tree line, calculating. Master Harrington's house was dark. He'd left for Richmond as planned. Most of the overseers were gathered near the slave quarters, questioning the other enslaved people about the escape. But Grimes? Grimes was alone in his cabin, drinking himself into a stupor, his rage and humiliation needing drowning. Perfect. Martha crept across the yard like a shadow, past the cursed trunk that still bore her blood, past the whipping post where so many had suffered. She reached Grimes's cabin and tested the door. Unlocked. Arrogance of a man who'd never feared retribution from those he oppressed. Inside, the cabin was sparse and mean, reflecting the soul of the man who lived there. Grimes sat at a rough-hewn table, a bottle of whiskey in front of him, his back to the door. He was muttering to himself, cursing Martha, cursing Josiah, cursing the storm that had ruined his plans. 50 nights, he slurred. Should have broken her, should have made her beg. Instead, she runs and I look like a fool. Master's gonna have my hide when he gets back. You looking for me? Martha's voice cut through the darkness like that blade she held. Grimes spun around, knocking over his chair, hand going for the pistol at his belt. But Martha was faster. She crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, that knife singing through the air, catching him across the forearm before he could draw. The pistol clattered to the floor. "You!" Grimes backed against the wall, blood pouring from his arm. "You're supposed to be running." "I was," Martha said, advancing on him like death itself. "But then I remembered. I promised you something back on that trunk. Promised that you'd bleed just like I bled. And Martha do Tronco keeps her promises." "The others will hear," Grimes said, his voice high with fear. "You'll never make it out alive." "Don't plan to," Martha said. "But you going first." She struck then, not wild but precise, the blade finding his belly and twisting. Grimes screamed, the sound cut short as Martha's ruined hand clamped over his mouth. She held him there, watching the light fade from his eyes, whispering the words Isaiah had taught her. "Your soul wanders now," she said, "never finding peace, never crossing over. The goofer dust marks you. The ancestors judge you. Every woman you ever touched, every family you ever broke, they waiting on the other side to greet you." Grimes tried to speak, blood bubbling from his lips, but no words came. Just a gurgling sound as his body went slack. Martha lowered him to the floor, pulled the knife free and stood over him for a long moment. "That's for my hands," she said quietly, "for my dignity, for every soul that suffered under your cruelty, for every child sold, every woman violated, every man broken. Your debt is paid in blood." Outside, someone had heard the scream. Voices were shouting, footsteps running toward the cabin. Martha had maybe 30 seconds before they burst through the door. She grabbed Grimes's pistol, checked that it was loaded, and positioned herself behind the doorframe. When the first overseer came through, she shot him in the chest. The second one got the knife. By the time the third arrived, the cabin was full of smoke from the pistol and the lamp Martha had overturned. Flames already licking at the dry wood walls. "Fire!" someone screamed. "The overseer's cabin's on fire!" In the chaos that followed, men running for water buckets, slaves being ordered to form lines, dogs barking in confusion. Martha slipped away again. She'd bought Josiah and the children time, maybe a full day or more. The plantation would be in disarray, the overseers too busy dealing with the dead and the fire to organize an immediate pursuit. And when they finally did come looking, they'd be searching for a monster, not a woman. They'd be afraid in a way they'd never been before. Martha ran through the night, blood on her hands and freedom in her heart, the ancestors singing victory songs that only she could hear. Behind her, Harrington's plantation burned bright against the Virginia darkness, a beacon visible for miles. And on the wind, if you listened close, you could hear her voice rising with the smoke. "We are not broken. We are not broken. The chains may bind our bodies, but our spirits fly free. Now listen here, child, 'cause this is where the story becomes legend, where history meets memory, and where one woman's suffering transforms into a whole community's resistance." Martha ran through that Virginia night with death on her heels and freedom in her sights, the drinking gourd constellation burning bright above her like the ancestors themselves were lighting her path north. She found Josiah and the children still hidden in that hollow cypress tree, waiting with hearts full of dread and hope intermingled. When Martha emerged from the darkness covered in blood that wasn't her own, Ella screamed before realizing it was her mama. Tom just reached out his little arms, too young to understand, but old enough to know he needed holding. "It's done," Martha said simply, collapsing into Josiah's arms. "Grimes is dead. 2 others too. The plantation's burning. We got maybe till dawn before they organize a real hunt." "You killed him," Josiah breathed. And it wasn't a question. He'd known from the moment she left what she was planning. "Sweet Jesus, Martha, you actually killed him." "And I'd do it again," Martha said fiercely. 1,000 times over. Now we move. North. Fast as these broken bodies can carry us. They traveled by night for 3 weeks, following the Underground Railroad's secret routes that existed more as whispered knowledge than actual maps. Station to station they went. A barn here, a root cellar there, a Quaker family's hidden room behind a false wall. The conductors risked everything to help them, white abolitionists and free black people both, united in their hatred of slavery's evil. Martha's hands never healed proper. The nail holes left her palms twisted and scarred, her grip weak, but her determination iron-strong. She learned to do things different, holding babies with her wrists instead of her palms, carrying water buckets with her forearms. The pain was constant, a reminder of the trunk and the price she'd paid for defiance. But every time she looked at her children walking free, she knew the price was worth it. Josiah's body mended slower, his ribs healed crooked, giving him a permanent limp and making breathing hard on cold days. But he was alive, and that was miracle enough. At each station, he'd ask about blacksmith work up north, making plans for the life they'd build once they reached true freedom. The hunt for them was relentless, but confused. Wanted posters went up across Virginia. Runaway slaves, dangerous. Woman named Martha, marked hands, killed overseer and 2 others. Reward $500, dead or alive. But the descriptions were vague, the searchers divided, and the Underground Railroad's network held strong. Every time the paddy rollers got close, the conductors moved Martha and her family to a new hiding place, always one step ahead of capture. Along the way, they met other freedom seekers. A young woman named Grace who'd escaped from a plantation in North Carolina, traveling alone with nothing but faith and courage. An older man called Solomon who'd been running for 6 months, moving slow because his legs were scarred from shackles worn too long. A family of 7 from Georgia, their youngest baby born free in a Maryland barn just days after crossing the Mason-Dixon line. Each had their own story of suffering and survival, and each added their strength to the group. "We ain't just running from something," Martha told them around a campfire in a hidden hollow deep in Pennsylvania woods. "We running toward something, toward a future where our children don't grow up in chains, toward a world where we're human beings, not property, toward justice." "You think we'll live to see that world?" Grace asked, her voice small but hopeful. "Maybe not us," Martha said, lifting her scarred hands to the firelight. "But our children will, or our grandchildren. The fight don't end when we cross into free territory. It just changes shape. We got to tell our stories, got to make sure the world knows what slavery really is. Not the lies they tell in newspapers, but the truth written on our backs and carved into our palms." They crossed into Pennsylvania on an October morning, when the leaves were turning colors that reminded Martha of fire and blood. The conductor who'd guided them the last leg of the journey, a Quaker man named Thomas Garrett who'd helped hundreds reach freedom, pointed to a marker stone by the roadside. "That's the Mason-Dixon line," he said. "Cross it, and you're in free territory. Pennsylvania law says you're human beings with rights, not property to be owned." Martha stood at that invisible boundary for a long moment, her children pressed against her legs, Josiah's hand in hers. Behind them lay Virginia and everything they'd survived. The auction blocks, the whipping posts, the slave quarters, the trunk. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. Freedom wasn't the end of struggle, she knew. Free black people up north still faced discrimination, poverty, violence, but it was a different kind of fight. One where they had agency, where they could build lives and raise children without the constant terror of being sold away. "We crossed together," Martha said, "as a family, as free people." They stepped over that line hand in hand, and Martha felt something shift inside her chest. The weight of bondage, 21 years of slavery, of being owned, of being treated as less than human, lifted just slightly. Not gone completely, never gone completely, but lightened. She breathed deep, filling her lungs with free air, and started crying. Not tears of sadness, but tears of release, of survival, of victory hard won at terrible cost. They settled in Philadelphia, in a neighborhood full of free black people and formerly enslaved folks building new lives. Josiah found work at a foundry owned by an abolitionist Quaker, his skills as a blacksmith still valuable despite his injuries. Martha took in sewing, her damaged hands learning to grip a needle different, but still able to work, still able to provide. But the work that became her true calling was the speaking. Abolitionist societies heard about Martha du Tronco, the woman who'd survived 50 nights on the trunk. who'd killed her overseer and escaped, who bore the marks of slavery on her body for all to see. They invited her to tell her story at meetings, at churches, at gatherings where white people who'd never seen slavery up close could hear what it truly was. At first, Martha was reluctant. The memories were too fresh, too painful. But Josiah encouraged her. "Your suffering wasn't for nothing," he said. "Make it mean something. Let it be the weapon that strikes at slavery itself." So Martha spoke. She stood before audiences of hundreds, held up her scarred palms, and told them about the trunk, about Grimes and his evil, about children being sold, families being torn apart, women being violated, men being worked to death. She didn't soften it, didn't make it palatable. She gave them the truth raw and bleeding, and it moved hearts that political speeches never touched. "These scars are my credentials," she'd say, her voice ringing through packed halls. "These twisted hands are my testimony. Look at them and understand. Slavery is not a peculiar institution or an economic necessity. It's torture. It's rape. It's murder dressed up in law and justified by greed. And it must end. Not gradually, not eventually, but now. Immediately, completely." Her speeches were published in abolitionist newspapers. Her story spread across the North like wildfire, adding fuel to the growing movement. When people spoke of slavery's horrors, they invoked Martha do Tronco's name. When they needed proof that enslaved people were fully human and capable of extraordinary courage, they pointed to her survival. Years passed. Ella grew into a young woman, educated in Pennsylvania schools, her mind sharp as any blade. Tom became a printer's apprentice, learning to set type for newspapers that printed his mother's speeches. They never forgot Virginia, never forgot the plantation, but they were building something new, a family legacy of resistance and resilience. In 1861, when Martha was 46 years old, the war she'd prophesied from the trunk finally came. The nation tore itself apart over slavery, brother fighting brother, and Martha watched with complex emotions. Joy that justice was finally arriving, sorrow at the cost it was taking, determination to see it through. She volunteered as a nurse for the Union Army, her damaged hands still capable of changing bandages and offering comfort to dying soldiers. She smuggled information to black regiments, helped escaped slaves reaching Union lines, continued speaking whenever she could. On January 1st, 1863, when Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, Martha stood in a church in Philadelphia surrounded by hundreds of free and formerly enslaved black people, and they wept together. It wasn't complete freedom. The proclamation only freed slaves in rebel states, and the war was far from over. But it was a beginning, a promise, an acknowledgement that they were human beings deserving of liberty. "We lived to see it," Josiah whispered, his arm around Martha's waist. "You lived to see it, baby. That prophecy on the trunk came true." Martha looked down at her hands, still twisted, still marked by the nails that had pierced them so long ago. She thought about all the souls who hadn't lived to see this day. Kofi, her daddy, sold away and died in Mississippi. Aunt Zilpha, who'd stayed at the plantation and died the following year. Brother Samuel, caught trying to escape and hanged. Samuel's mother, who'd lost her child to the auction block. All the unnamed, uncounted millions who'd suffered and died in bondage. "This is for them," she said quietly. "For every soul that bled, every family that was broken, every child that was sold. This freedom is built on their sacrifice. We can't ever forget that. We got to carry their memory forward, make sure their suffering wasn't in vain." Decades later, when Martha was an old woman, her hair white as cotton, her body bent but her spirit still fierce, young people would come to hear her speak. They'd look at her scarred hands and ask, "Miss Martha, was it worth it? All that suffering, all that pain, was freedom worth the cost?" And Martha would smile, that same terrible, beautiful smile she'd worn on the trunk, and say, "Child, freedom ain't something you pay for once and then own forever. It's something you fight for every day, something you defend with your body and your voice and your courage. The scars I carry are proof that I was willing to pay that price. The question ain't whether it was worth it. The question is whether you're willing to pay it too, in whatever form your generation requires. She died in 1890, 75 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who'd never known slavery firsthand, but carried its legacy in their blood. Her last words were in Yoruba, a language she'd learned from the old ones, a prayer of thanksgiving to the ancestors who'd sustained her. They buried her in a cemetery for free black people, her gravestone simple but profound. Martha survived the trunk, earned her freedom, never stopped fighting. And late at night, folks say, if you stand quiet by her grave, you can still hear her singing. Not mournful, not sad, but triumphant. The songs of resistance, the songs of survival, the songs that carried her people from bondage to freedom and beyond. Now you heard the story, children. You heard about Martha du Tronco, about 50 nights of suffering transformed into a lifetime of resistance. You heard about the trunk that tried to break her but instead forged her into something unbreakable. You heard about love that survived torture, about family that endured separation, about courage that turned enslaved woman into warrior. And maybe you thinking this just one story, just one woman's pain and triumph. But I tell you now, every enslaved person got a story like this. Every black person in America carries these scars, visible or not. Martha's trunk is our collective memory. Her 50 nights are our shared trauma. Her survival is our inheritance. So when you walk this earth, you remember. Remember that freedom was bought with blood and suffering. Remember that justice required sacrifice. Remember that our ancestors survived horrors we can barely imagine, so that we might live to tell about it. Those who suffered, suffered. Those who resisted left memory. And memory is what we preserve here, in the files of slavery.